All right, let's do this. We're tackling Stephen King's IT and all its adaptations.
All of them,
You
wow.
bet. The miniseries, the new movies, the whole shebang.
Ambitious. But it's a good kind of ambitious, I think.
You know what always gets me about IT is how it just gets under your skin.
Yeah, it's not just a surface level jump scare kind of thing.
Right. It digs into those deep, primal fears, especially those from childhood.
Exactly. The way childhood experiences can shape us, even as adults, King really nails that.
And look, for starters, we've got to address the elephant or maybe the clown in the room.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
The 1990 miniseries versus the more recent movies. Talk about a time warp.
Not just time, budget too. And what audiences expected from horror back then, completely different.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, think about those special effects in the miniseries.
Yeah.
Bit rough around the edges, right?
Well, yeah. Limited budget for a TV miniseries back then. You can really see it, especially in the climax.
Oh, that spider monster. It's something.
Yeah, it's memorable. It's become this case study of how budget limits can affect things. But, sometimes those limits can actually add to the psychological impact.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the miniseries had to rely more on suggestion, on atmosphere, makes the viewer fill in the blanks. And sometimes what you imagine is way scarier.
That's true. So do you think that makes the miniseries more effective then? Or do the modern movies, with all their CGI and intensity, just hit harder?
It's a tough one. I mean, the modern films definitely go for that visceral punch, that opening with Georgie in the 2017 film.
Oh, yeah, in the storm drain.
So graphic, so much more unsettling than the miniseries version, sets a totally different tone.
No kidding. Right from the start, you're in Derry's darkness. And speaking of things that are unsettling, we have to talk about the different Pennywise.
Right. Tim Curry versus Bill Skarsgård.
Iconic versus, well, also iconic, but in a very different way.
Curry's Pennywise, he was almost seductive, like a mischievous, creepy uncle. You're a little scared, but drawn to him.
He reels you in, then bam, the real terror hits.
Precisely. Skarsgård, though, pure nightmare fuel. He taps into something much more primal, much more disturbing.
It's those movements.
Yeah.
Jerky, unpredictable, that voice, that smile. It's like he's not even human.
He's this unsettling force mimicking humanity. Makes you wonder, what does it even mean to be human in the face of something like that?
Right. And it makes me think about how horror has evolved, Curry's Pennywise, he's a product of his time. Horror was often more psychological, relying on suspense.
Exactly. And now it's more in your face.
Visceral, yeah.
So, which Pennywise is scarier? It's not just personal preference. It's about how horror has changed and how we understand fear now.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how this deep dive is about more than just comparing adaptations, doesn't it? It's about how our relationship with fear is shifted over time.
Totally. Now, what about the structure of these adaptations? The miniseries jumps back and forth, like the book. Kids, then adults, then back again.
Right, but the films, they split it up. Kids in one, adults in the other.
It's a trade-off, isn't it? The miniseries directly contrasts those two timelines. You see how childhood trauma hangs on, but it can be a lot to follow.
Yeah, I can see that. And the movies, they're more streamlined, but maybe you lose some of those connections between past and present.
So which is better? A straightforward narrative or this deeper exploration of how the past haunts us? It's a key question,
Yeah.
right? And it's what makes IT so captivating. It's not just scares, it's about grappling with these big ideas. Memory, trauma, how our childhood experiences stick with us.
Absolutely. It makes you think. And that's something we'll be diving into a lot more as we look at each adaptation in detail.
We've got a lot to unpack.
We do.
Yeah.
But for now, let's start with that 1990 miniseries. It really captures the book's core, doesn't it? The losers face Pennywise, make that blood oath, and then years later they reunite. Got to confront their fears, fulfill that promise.
It's really interesting how the miniseries, even with its limitations, gets that feeling of nostalgia, that loss of innocence that King does so well.
It's not just about a scary clown. It's about that dark side of growing up. Man, I remember being terrified of that storm drain scene when I was a kid.
The power of suggestion really hits those childhood fears right where it hurts.
No kidding. And even though the miniseries might not have the visual intensity of the new movies, it still has that creepiness, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Always.
Exactly. It's a reminder that what we can't see can be just as terrifying, if not more so.
Now, the 2017 film, it takes a completely different approach, doesn't it? Derry, Maine, 1989. We're right there. The atmosphere, the detail.
And the way it dives into each loser's personal fears, how Pennywise targets their vulnerabilities.
Yeah, like in the Neibolt house.
Yeah.
Pennywise doing that creepy dance. Pure nightmare fuel, like he's twisting their anxieties into something grotesque.
The film definitely goes for a more visual kind of horror, but it gets the psychological stuff too. The idea that true terror comes from inside us.
From those fears we try to bury but can't escape. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom, right? The movie has these great moments of camaraderie, the way the losers come together, support each other.
Yeah, like the rock fight scene.
Right. That scene is so good because it shows the power of connection. We're stronger together. We don't have to face those demons alone.
And that's a theme throughout all the adaptations, isn't it? Unity versus isolation. Pennywise tries to divide them, but their bond is what lets them fight back.
It's a powerful message, especially these days when it's so easy to feel alone.
Absolutely. IT, in all its different versions, reminds us we're not alone in our fears.
Yeah.
And sometimes the bravest thing is just to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm scared, but I'm not giving up.
Well said. Well said.
So we've talked about the strengths of the miniseries, but what about the criticisms?
Yeah, it's definitely got its share of those,
Oh.
especially compared to the newer movies, like what didn't quite work for you.
Well, one of the big ones is how it handles the losers as adults. In the book, that reunion, it's this powerful moment. They reconnect, face their trauma together.
It's like they rediscover that bond, like it never really went away.
Exactly. But in the miniseries, it feels rushed. Like
Yeah.
they just show up and it's like, okay, time to fight Pennywise.
Yeah, you don't get that same emotional depth.
Right. And I think part of it's the time, you know. They had to cram a lot into a few hours.
And they spend a lot of that time on the special effects.
Oh, yeah. That spider monster at the end. It's,
Yeah.
Yeah. A choice.
A choice is a good way to put it. Some people love it, some people not so much.
It's funny, right? What was scary then? Oh, it doesn't always hold up now.
Like, audiences have different expectations now. Horror has changed so much.
Totally. And it's fun to look back and see how these adaptations reflect, like, the fears of their time.
Speaking of fears, let's talk about the 2017 movie again. One thing that really struck me was Derry itself. It's not just a setting, it's like this character, this oppressive force.
It's like this metaphor for the darkness under the surface of any town, you know?
Yeah.
Evil hiding in plain sight.
And the way they show it with the rundown buildings, the graffiti, you constantly feel like something bad's about to happen.
Atmosphere is everything in horror. And they nail it. Sound design, too, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Those little noises, that music. So unsettling.
It all works together to create this really immersive experience.
And it's not just about cheap scares either. It's about what they don't show you. The things you sense are there, but can't quite see.
Which brings us back to Pennywise. He preys on those unspoken fears, the ones we try to hide.
Like he sees right through us. To the stuff we don't even want to admit to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what's so scary. He's like a mirror to our own darkness.
He's the embodiment of those things we try to forget. Those childhood traumas that stick with us.
And the fact that he targets kids, it's just awful.
Kids are so vulnerable. The 2017 film really captures that fear of the unknown that we feel as children.
Like when you're little and everything seems so much bigger, scarier, and you don't understand it.
And those fears don't just disappear when we grow up, do they? They just morph into something else.
Which leads us right into IT Chapter 2. The losers as adults dealing with the fallout of their childhood trauma.
They've tried to move on, but Pennywise coming back forces them to deal with it head on.
It's not just fighting Pennywise, it's fighting their own inner demons.
Exactly. All those doubts, those insecurities, the film shows how they can really haunt you.
And that's where memory comes in. They have to remember not just the bad stuff, but the good stuff too.
The happy memories, those moments that gave them hope, that's how they fight back.
So the film splitting the story, kids in one, adults in the other. It was to make that point about memory.
I think so. It emphasizes how our past shapes us, but doesn't have to define us. Remembering, forgetting, finding that balance.
It's tough though, isn't it? Holding on to the important stuff without letting it, consume you.
Yeah, and Chapter 2 shows that. The losers trying to reconcile who they were with who they are now, realizing they need both to move forward.
It's like healing from trauma. It's a process, not just this one-time thing.
Right, it takes work, it takes time, and
Yeah.
sometimes you gotta go back to those painful memories. But you can also find a strength you didn't know you had.
And that's where having people you trust who get it, that's so crucial. It's a reminder that you're not alone, which again takes us back to that idea of friendship. Both of the newer IT films really highlight that. The loser's bond is what lets them overcome everything.
Their shared history, their loyalty. It's what gives them the strength to face their fears and fight back.
And that's a message that people really connect with, don't they? That even the most unlikely heroes can do amazing things if they work together, if they have hope.
It's a powerful message. And it makes you think, right, about who your tribe is, who you can rely on, who believes in you, even when things are tough.
Speaking of believing, let's talk about the new HBO series for a minute. Welcome to Derry, exploring Pennywise's origin story. That's a bold move.
It is. I mean, part of what makes him so scary is that we don't know much about him.
Right. But I'm kind of curious, like maybe learning about his past will add something new to the story, give it more depth.
It could go either way, couldn't it? Maybe demystifying him will make him less scary. Or maybe it'll be even more disturbing.
Yeah. Like what if we find out something that makes his actions even more terrifying?
It's the risk you take with origin stories. Do they humanize the villain or just make them more monstrous?
I'm thinking it'll be the second one. Like knowing where Pennywise came from,
Yeah.
it could just amplify the horror.
Yeah, and imagine if they show how he's connected to Derry itself. Like, it's not just where bad things happen. It's, I don't know, inherently evil.
Ooh, creepy. Like it's this breeding ground for darkness. And that makes you wonder, is evil something that just exists? Or is it something we create?
Whoa, deep thoughts. But it's a question at the heart of IT, isn't it? Is Pennywise this force of nature, pure evil? Or is he something else? A reflection of our own capacity for darkness?
Right. Like he's our fears and anxieties given form. And if he is, does that mean we're part of the problem? Like, are we complicit? Man, that's a heavy thought.
It is. And that's why Stephen King is so good. He makes you think about these things, these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the monsters we might be creating.
It's not just entertainment, it's making us look in the mirror a little bit.
Exactly. And I think that's why people keep coming back to IT, even all these years later. It's more than just scares. It's about, I don't know, the human condition and the darkness inside us all.
Well said. And with Welcome to Derry, it'll be interesting to see how they handle all of that, how they explore Pennywise and Derry and, well, everything.
I'm definitely curious to see what they do, especially with Pennywise. Like, can they keep him mysterious and give us this backstory? It's a tough balance.
They've got a great team behind the series, though. I'm pretty optimistic.
Me too. And I hope they really dig into, like, the psychology of it all, how our past experiences shape us, even if we try to forget them.
Now, before we wrap up this part, let's talk a little about how the different IT adaptations have been received. Critics, audiences. It's interesting to look back, see how those reactions have changed over time.
It is. Like, the miniseries, people liked it when it came out, but now it gets a lot of criticism, especially the adult stuff. And, well, that spider monster ending.
It's hard to compare it to what we have now,
Yeah.
special effects, storytelling.
Yeah.
It's just a different era.
Yeah, what was scary back then doesn't always hit the same way now. Plus, the miniseries, very melodramatic, very sentimental, which was the style at the time.
Right, like a made-for-TV movie. But hey, it was still groundbreaking for what it was. It pushed the boundaries of what you could show on TV, and it scared a whole generation of kids.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It really paved the way for the horror that came after.
And then you have the 2017 movie, which was a huge hit, right? Critics loved it, audiences loved it, everyone was talking about it.
It really felt like it tapped into something in the culture. Like, everyone was obsessed with nostalgia, with the 80s.
And Stranger Things was huge at the time, too. Like, suddenly everyone was into these stories about kids facing these dark forces.
The 2017 film's themes about bullying, trauma, friendship, it really resonated with people, especially younger audiences, I think. Like, they saw themselves in the losers.
And it got people excited about Stephen King again. Like, there were all these new adaptations coming out. It was a good time to be a horror fan.
Definitely. And that success led to Chapter 2, right? Which, I mean, it wasn't as universally loved, but...
Yeah, the reviews were more mixed. Some people felt like it wasn't as good as the first one.
Right. But others really liked it. I think it's because it deals with more mature themes. It's not just about jump scares. It's about facing your inner demons. It gets pretty heavy.
Some people want a fun, scary movie, and that's cool. But Chapter 2 asks more of the audience. Makes you think about the complexities of human nature, about how trauma sticks with you.
It's not for everyone, but it's a good example of how these adaptations, they're all different. They reflect different things, different approaches to horror.
And that's the beauty of art, right? Everyone takes away something different.
Absolutely. And the fact that people are still debating these IT adaptations, still talking about them, it just shows how powerful King's story is. It's a story that keeps evolving, keeps finding new audiences, and it always reflects something back at us, you know? our anxieties, our fears.
It reminds us that even though there's darkness in the world, there's also hope. We can overcome these things.
Yeah, IT is about facing our demons, but it's also about the importance of connection, finding those people who support you, who help you through the tough stuff.
So to wrap up, for our listeners who want to dive even deeper into the world of IT, where should they start?
Well, the book, of course, it's a classic, and it goes into so much more detail than the adaptations can.
Totally agree. You can't beat the original.
There are also tons of essays and articles that analyze the book, really dig into the themes and the symbolism.
And for the movie buffs out there, there are some great behind-the-scenes documentaries about the different adaptations. You can see how they brought King's vision to life, all the challenges they faced.
And don't forget the online fan communities. There are so many people out there who are passionate about IT, sharing their theories, their artwork.
It's a whole world to explore. So whether you're a diehard fan or just discovering IT for the first time, there's something out there for you.
Definitely. And with Welcome to Derry on the horizon, it's a great time to revisit the adaptations we have, think about what works, what doesn't, and how they all contribute to the story as a whole.
It's an exciting time to be an IT fan. So much to look forward to. And who knows, maybe we'll have to do another deep dive once the new series comes out.
I'd be down for that. Until then, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of IT.
And remember, keep the lights on, just in case.
Sweet dreams. It's funny, isn't it? IT, it's this terrifying story with a killer clown and all this darkness, but in the end, it really comes down to the power of friendship.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Like, even when things are at their worst, those connections with other people, that's where you find strength.
Exactly. The losers, they're all messed up in their own ways, right? They've got their own insecurities, their baggage, but they find comfort in knowing they're not alone. They go through it together.
And that's something we see again and again throughout all the adaptations. Unity versus isolation. Pennywise wants to separate them, exploit their fears.
But it's their bond, that connection, that lets them fight back.
It's a powerful message. And it makes you think about IT's impact, how it just keeps resonating with people generation after generation. Why do you think that is? What makes this story so timeless?
Well, I think it's because it speaks to those deep, universal fears, the kind that everyone has, no matter who you are or where you're from.
It's not just about being scared of clowns. It's about those things that haunt us from the inside, those anxieties that can really hold you back in life.
Yeah, exactly. It's about those inner demons, those shadows from our past. And I think that's why IT has become so iconic. It reflects those struggles we all face with fear, with loss, with the things that have happened to us.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's hope in there, too.
Oh, absolutely. There's this idea that even in the darkest times, we can be resilient. The human spirit, can overcome a lot.
And the story tells us it's okay to be scared. It's okay to admit you're vulnerable.
But you don't have to go through it alone. Reach out to someone, find your people, ask for help when you need it. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of IT, what's the main message you want to leave our listeners with? What's the one thing you hope they take away from all of this?
Let's see. I guess it would be this. Don't be afraid to face your fears. Acknowledge your weaknesses, the things you struggle with. But never forget the importance of connection, of having people you can rely on. Find your tribe, the ones who have your back no matter what. And remember, even when it feels like you're surrounded by darkness, there's always light somewhere. You just have to keep looking for it.
That's a great message. Couldn't have said it better myself. And hey, with Welcome to Derry coming soon, I have a feeling we'll be revisiting this whole conversation before long.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Can't wait to see what this series does with the story. It's going to be interesting.
All right, folks, that's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep those lights on, just to be safe.
Sweet dreams, everyone.